Hey everyone, Elias Acuna here at HeSellsHouses. Let's teach you how to buy some real estate. So this is the homebuyer class that I've done a number of times, probably for hundreds of buyers over the years. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of go through the general framework of how the process works. We'll hit upon a couple different steps and key points. But I think before we get into this, one thing that you may want to understand is that the way things work, even in Massachusetts, can vary depending on which market you're in or which town or city that you're buying in. So it's always important that you discuss with an agent the correct process in terms of how to do things, where it is that you're actually purchasing. So step one, figuring out why it is that you actually want to buy a house is probably the most important step in all of this. When you go ahead and you purchase real estate, you're actually spending more money than you're really ever going to spend on anything that you ever will, unless you buy another house down the line or you really hit the lottery or something, right? And most people aren't in that position. So the purchase of a home is really a large transaction. So you want to make sure that you understand your own motivations as to why it is you're actually trying to purchase a property. There could be a whole number of reasons why you want to buy a home. It is still the number one way that families in America build wealth, long-term wealth over time. That's through real estate. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's always a great investment. There is a difference between value in use and, a return on an investment. So you don't expect to be buying a house, or don't buy a house just because you think you're going to make money on it. You really should be buying a house because you need a place to live, that you're looking to have some freedom in terms of what it is that you can do on a property, that you want some more security versus being in a rental and not necessarily knowing that your costs may go up in the future, or perhaps you could get kicked out at some point. People love the fact that when you own a house, you get to make all those decisions. As a tenant, you don't necessarily get to do all of those things that you normally can do as a homeowner. Now, there are some additional costs and responsibilities to being a homeowner, but there are also some long-term benefits. And there's always a great feeling when you're working and paying towards something that in the end you're going to get a return on, or you're going to get some value out of it. And again, even if you purchase a property for whatever price it is, and you sell it for less than that down the road, there is still value in the use. You still had value in the fact that you lived in the house, that you were able to make memories there, and you were able to do all those things that, again, you may not necessarily have been able to do in a rental. And with the house, at the end of those 30 years, that mortgage is paid. Whereas with a rental, you get a good handshake and a mortgage is paid, but it's not yours. So once you figured out that you actually want to buy a house, your next step is to determine what your pre-approval situation is, or your financing situation is. And you're going to need to go ahead and talk to a lender about that. You're going to want to figure out, how much money you're going to need in terms of a down payment. That could be as little as 0% down, no money down. Though most buyers tend to end up in some sort of program where they're putting anywhere from 3 to 5% down. An FHA would be a 3.5% down loan. Mass housing, which is a conventional loan in Massachusetts, is typically anywhere from 3 to 5% down. VA loans are, again, no money down. There are some USDA rural loans, which are no money down as well. And then each individual lender sometimes that has their own in-house loan program, where that loan or the down payment amount is going to vary. Now, once you've actually spoken to the lender, you should have a general idea as to what it is that you qualify for. And we need to know a few things from this. One, we need to know the amount that you qualify for. And obviously we want to know this so that we can figure out the price, the range of houses we should be looking at, the price range we want to set on our property searches, and then more importantly, we want to know the type of loan that you're actually working with. And the reason we need to know that is because there are some loans that will restrict the type of houses that we actually can purchase with those. Things like FHA loans and VA loans have conditional requirements, whereas many houses won't pass the requirements for financing because of things like missing handrails or chipping paint, or perhaps there's some broken windows or something going on with the roof. There could be a whole number of reasons why it won't pass for that type of financing. And sometimes we don't even know whether or not it will pass until you have like an appraisal done. But again, we need to know up front what type of loan we're dealing with. That way we could get a good idea which houses we can actually take a look at. The other thing is the lender's going to tell you how much money you're going to need overall, in terms of your down payment and your closing costs. Now, depending on the type of loan that you're doing, you may be able to finance or ask the seller for a credit back towards your closing costs, which then leaves you in a position where you really only need to come up with your down payment. But in today's market, it's really tough to actually get a seller to agree to do that credit if you're in a multiple offer situation. So depending on what the market is and depending on the house, you may or may not be able to get that credit. So again, you might need to have a little bit more money for savings. Now, if you are concerned about savings, some lenders and some cities and towns actually have some grant programs available, where as a home buyer, you can apply for these funds and then actually utilize them in order to cover your closing costs or part of your down payment, so that you're not necessarily in a position to ask for the seller, for that credit, and hopefully that'll, level the playing field versus another buyer who doesn't need those credits at all. So now that once you've gotten the actual pre-approval letter from the lender, you got to figure out whether or not you actually have enough funds or enough money in order to make the purchase. So again, you're going to need your down payment for the property, and that'll depend upon the type of loan that you're actually getting from the lender. You may or may not need that closing costs funds in order to purchase, and again, that'll depend upon the loan program and whatever house it is that we're actually trying to buy. But there are actually going to be a couple of other costs that you're going to incur no matter what you're purchasing. You're going to have things like your inspections on the property. You may more than likely have to pay for your appraisal up front. Depending on the lender, that could be anywhere from $400 to $700. Sometimes you pay for part of it, sometimes you pay for all of it. The home inspection really depends on who you're using for a home inspector, and then also the type of inspection that you're gonna do on the property. That could be anywhere from $400 to $1,000 right there. Again, depending on the type of inspections that you're doing. You're also going to need to pay for your appraisal up front, and a lot of times you have to pay for your 1 year of homeowner's insurance. Now, some buyers get a little bit confused by that because their insurance is actually going to be included as part of their loan payment, their taxes and insurance, but that's done through your escrows. And in order to set that up properly, you actually have to prepay a full year of homeowners insurance, so that when you're escrowing that payment every month, they collect 1/12, and then by the time the bill is due next year, the lender then continues to pay that bill every year. But that first year as a buyer, again, you're going to have to pay for that full year of homeowners insurance. So in Massachusetts, really depends on where you're buying. But most of the time I tell buyers you're probably going to need at least another $2,500 on top of your down payment, and your closing cost obligations, in order to cover whatever expenses we typically run into for purchasing a home. All right, so next step is connecting with an agent, and this is actually a step you may have already taken at the beginning. A lot of times I find that buyers will come to me directly, say, hey, I'm looking to buy a house, or I'm interested in buying a house, where do I start? And then from there I direct them to a lender. The agent might be the first step you take. But up to this point, if you haven't connected with an agent, you definitely need to do so by now. And really, You want to connect with somebody who you're comfortable with, who's knowledgeable, able to answer your questions about the market and the general process. You also want an agent that's available. In this business, you'll find that there are a lot of agents that are part-time. There are some agents who are full-time. Whatever the situation is, though, you want to make sure that they're available for when you're available. The market moves very fast now, and many times we need to be able to get into a house within the next day or so. And if let's say your agent is not available for another week, then you might miss out just because of that. So, look for an agent, and again, that's going to have knowledge and availability. Now, one of the things that I typically recommend at the homebuyer classes is I tell people to, talk to your friends and family, right? They've probably purchased a property, or you probably know somebody who's purchased a property, and you want to find out what kind of experience that they've had with those agents. This is really the type of situation where you want to trust that the person that you're actually working with, because again, you're about to spend more money you're ever going to spend in your whole life. So you want to make sure that you're comfortable with this person, that you're comfortable asking questions, and that you're comfortable with where it is that they're leading you. So you want to go ahead, and again, you're going to find an agent, and when that agent first meets with you, there's a couple of things that they should be doing, and this is what I typically do. And the first thing that should be done is the Massachusetts mandatory licensee consumer relationship agreement, the consumer relationship disclosure. Now this is, and I'll actually just put up a copy of this. Should hopefully come up nicely on here. And what this is just a disclosure, letting the consumer, who it is the agent represents, what their relationship is with either you or anybody else involved in the transaction. Okay. Now, for our purposes here in Massachusetts, we've got a couple of types of what could be considered buyer situations or buyer agencies. In a traditional office, they're going to have a situation where not only the agent that you're signing on with, not only do they represent you, but essentially the entire office represents you. And that's more of a traditional agency. More recently, we've seen something else pop up called designated agency. There's still a buyer agency portion to it, but essentially what that means is that the agent that you're signing on with is the only agent that actually represents you and not anybody else in the company. So again, here's the differences. You've got a situation where either you're signing on with one agent as for buyer representation, or you have a situation where you're signing on with an entire company for buyer representation. All right, so you want to understand again, what is it that relationship that you have there. Now, there's a couple of other possibilities that you may see. There's something called a facilitator. This is somebody that really just they don't really represent you, but they can help you through the transaction. And then the other possibility is what's called dual agency. Now, a dual agency is something that you have to get permission from the parties before you can even go see the house. But at the very basic definition, dual agency is the situation where one party represents party represents both sides of the transaction. Right? You've got essentially one broker or one company or one agent that's representing both sides. Now, depending on the original buyer relationship you have, whether or not you're signed on with an individual agent or an entire company, dual agency may come up a couple of different ways. Now, if you've signed on a company like mine where our entire office actually represents you, dual agency comes up anytime you're interested in a listing that my office has on the market. And the reason that is that my office signs on to represent all of our clients, right? So if we have a buyer, again, the entire company represents that buyer. If we have a seller, the entire company represents that seller. So therefore, if you have a buyer and the seller both being represented by the one company, if they then do a transaction together, again, the company is representing both sides in that transaction, and that is still called dual agency. Now, if you go with an office where you're signing on with one individual agent, the only time you have dual agency is if that individual agent is representing both the buyer and the seller. Now, the other thing that comes up in that office is instead of a dual agency, you have what's called designated agency. Now, that means there's one company that's representing both the buyer and the seller, but individually, you have one agent who's actually representing those clients. Now, you want to make sure that you have an understanding of whatever this relationship is. Your agent should be able to explain this prior to you even seeing houses that would put you in this situation. And they're actually supposed to make sure you understand that relationship before you even enter the doorway. So just make sure you understand that. And again, they'll. This is the first document you should be seeing when you're actually dealing with agents. Now, what is the agent there for, right? The agent's there really to guide you through the process. It used to be that agents had to be the source of all the listings. You had to go to an agent to find out how to buy a house, where to find the listings, anything related to real estate. Whereas the internet has pretty much changed all of that, and there's so much information available out there to consumers that the agent's role has really changed. Their role is to really guide you through the process, right? I like to tell my clients that if you tell me your destination, and I'll tell you if and how we can get there, right? There may be a couple of different paths we can choose, or maybe it's not something that we can make happen based on your current situation. And if that's the case, then we can come up with a plan in order to get you there in the future. All right, so that agent is there to work in your interest. Depending on your agreement with them, you may or may not have to pay like out of pocket additional to anything else, like you would your down payment or closing costs. A lot of times in our area, agents are paid through the transaction, through the MLS offering, whatever is being offered there. But there is no standard out there. So, everything is negotiable, and your agent should be able to explain to you how it is that they're going to get compensated for the transaction and whether or not you're going to actually have to show up with any cash for that. One of the times, more often than not, that you may need to show up with cash as a buyer to pay for your agent is in a situation like a for sale by owner, where the seller doesn't want to include that commission as part of the transaction. Now, when you're meeting with the agent, you really want to have a nice long conversation with them about what it is that you're actually looking for. And when you're talking about what you're looking for, as we actually go through the process, seeing houses and all that stuff, you're gonna kind of have this the period of self-reflection where you're gonna really need to determine the things that you need versus all of the things that you want. And so as you go through the process, again, that'll kind of be a long conversation to have. Okay, so some of the other items you should be seeing when you first meet with an agent. You may be seeing a buyer contract with your agent. Now, the buyer contract may lay out the terms of the agreement between you and the agent, the obligations you have to them and the obligations that they have to you. Some agents don't actually sign buyer contracts, and they just do the buyer agency, which is that disclosure form. So, again, just make sure you understand what it is that you're signing, what it is that's being presented to you, and ask questions. What does this mean? What is, does this obligate me to do? Some buyer contracts do put you in a position where you have to pay a portion of the commission if the minimum amount is not covered as part of the transaction. Also may put you in a position to pay that agent even if you don't use them to purchase the property that you end up closing on. You may also see a list of commonly asked questions, just general information about the process. Agents should also be providing you with something called Facts for Consumers. This is an information pamphlet regarding home inspections. It's also got a link to Massachusetts a website for information on home inspectors. You can get a whole list of all the licensed home inspectors in Massachusetts there, and pretty much just tells you should get a home inspection no matter what, even if it's a brand new house. Something else that a lot of agents are providing these days is a concrete disclosure. If you're close to Connecticut border or really anywhere in Massachusetts, there is a possibility of concrete issues for houses built after a certain year. This is a large issue in Connecticut and something that we're starting to experience in Massachusetts. So it's important that you get this disclosure and at least understand what it means for you and the property that you may be purchasing. So again, that's the concrete disclosure. You're also going to get information regarding lead paint. Now, you may not see this disclosure until you actually go make an offer on a house, and you really absolutely need to have this completed when you go to make an offer, because you want to make sure you understand what the situation is with lead at the property. Now, any house built before 1978 has a possibility of lead-based paint hazards, and you as an owner or as a new owner, if there's going to be anyone under the age of 6 living in the property, then you have to make sure that it's lead compliant. I believe you have about 90 days now in order to make sure that it's compliant. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be lead free, but it does have to be lead compliant. This is something that is very important because it could be minimal cost in order to do it, or it could be a pretty large cost depending on the amount of lead and where the lead is actually located in the property. Okay, so after reviewing, your initial package with the agent that you're working with, you actually want to discuss with them, what the market's like. Right. So before you actually get out there and start seeing houses, you really want to make sure you have a good understanding about what it is you're actually about to get into. All right. Right now in Massachusetts, in many places, we're dealing with a seller's market. So there's a lot of competition out there. You really have to be quick and competitive when it comes to making your offers, and it's not the type of market where it's common to negotiate the seller down on price. In fact, it's very common to have to go over the asking price, and in many situations far above the asking price. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities out there to negotiate down, though they are not too many, but an experienced agent's going to be able to work with you to maybe target those particular properties that maybe have some room for negotiation. The ones that have been on the market a little bit longer, perhaps they're distressed or there's something out of the ordinary that's preventing them from selling quickly. And again, maybe those are the opportunities, in order to negotiate down. But markets change, and every market is even local. Whatever you hear nationally, whatever you hear even on your county level, doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly what's going on in the town that you're buying. So again, another reason why it's important to have a knowledgeable agent who understands the market, who can explain to you what it is for days on the market, what it means, when we're talking about months supply or absorption rates. How do they tell if it's a buyer's market or a seller's market? If they have a good understanding of that, then they should be able to, again, explain that to you and guide you through the process pretty well. Now, once you get a good understanding of the market, you want to go ahead and start getting your property list together, and then and seeing houses. Now, in terms of lists, I mean, there's so many different ways of getting property lists. Every agent's going to have access to the MLS, so they're going to be able to set you up on an automated email list where you can get listings within your criteria. Certain number of bedrooms. If you want to, cap it off by a certain price range, map it out for certain locations. Again, all that can be done. You can also go online. There's a whole bunch of different websites out there. One of the things that you need to understand, though, there is a lot of misinformation on different websites. Some websites are really only designed in order to get eyes on it and then to sell those, leads to agents. So you want to make sure that you're connecting with your agent in order to verify that the information that you're seeing is actually accurate. The MLS tends to have the most accurate information, whereas a lot of the websites that you see online may be pulling some information from the MLS, but again, not necessarily the most accurate stuff out there. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to get your list together. I do also recommend that you should be doing drive-bys as much as property as possible, especially with areas that you're unfamiliar with. If you're moving to a new town or a new city or whatever the case is, or even if you are familiar with an area, you should check it out at different times. Do a drive-by and take a look at the neighborhood. Make sure that the amenities that you're looking for are available there. Check the access to the highway if you need to be able to travel easily. Look at the GPS to see how far you are from work if you're concerned about the commute. Do you need easy access to a grocery store, or is that like 30 minutes away, right? It all depends on how the neighborhood's set up. Whereas some areas you're going to have huge access to amenities, whereas other places you might have to travel a little bit further. But you also might have a difference in things like noise or activity because of the type of neighborhood that it's set up to be. So again, do your drive-bys, check out those areas. You're about to spend more money than you'll ever spend in your whole life, so make sure that you're doing your homework, right? Now, when you're ready actually to see houses, you want to have your agent schedule everything. Right now, the agent that you're working with is there to, again, guide you through the whole process. So don't start contacting other agents that don't represent you. In order to see houses, you should be scheduling everything through your agent. Now, depending on how your agent works, sometimes they may be on a team, so you might have a couple of agents that you're working with. But you want to make sure that whoever the leader is, or the person that you're working with directly, that they know what properties that you're looking to get into, and that they understand your schedule. So you can go ahead and get those scheduled. Now, for initial appointments, especially these days, we do need to limit access to properties. We really recommend that you keep the showings to the decision makers. If we can keep it to 2 decision makers, that is great. I've seen all sorts of situations in the past. There's one, it is someone's private property, so we don't want to just show up with 15 people. I understand it's a very exciting and fun process to go be looking at houses, but it's also personal space that we're going into, so we don't want to overcrowd a property. And again, these days we really can't do that. And the other thing is, I always recommend the buyers, you're the one who's going to be paying the mortgage, right? So when you're going in for that really first initial impression on a property, it really should be your initial impression on your own. I've seen situations where family members or friends are kind of giving their opinion, and then people make a decision based on someone else's opinion, and then regret the fact that they didn't just make their own decision. Maybe they decided not to make an offer on a house, realize they should have made an offer before, or made an offer on something and then decide to walk away from it because they realize it wasn't really the house for them. So during those initial showings, you really want to try to keep it to whoever's paying the mortgage, right? Now, when we're going out for those showings, you're going to be looking at a whole lot of different things. And believe me, the first time you go through the house, you never see all the stuff that's bad. It's usually by the second time you go through with the inspection, you start realizing, oh, there's a couple things we didn't notice. But your agent is hopefully pointing out some potential issues, especially if you're working with like an FHA loan or some other financing that limits the condition. You're going to be looking at the overall condition of the property. Are there any concerns in there? Are there any items that potentially could prevent us from financing? Is there anything that maybe we can ask the seller to do depending on the offer that we make on the house? Obviously if we're interested. What about the area? What about the general condition of the house? Does it have the potential space that you need in the future? Again, as you kind of go through this, there's going to be some self-reflection, figuring out the things that you need versus the things that you want. Do you need 4 bathrooms, or you just wanted 4 bathrooms, right? Or do you need 2 bathrooms? Or if you think you needed 2 bathrooms, maybe you really only need 1.5 bathrooms, and perhaps we can expand in the future, right? Is there any flexibility in the property? What are the general sizes of the rooms? Are they large enough for what we're looking to do? Is there a basement for extra space? How's the heating system? Can we do central air? There's going to be certain things that are going to be important to you, not necessarily somebody else. So the agent is going to be there to guide you, but they're not going to be there to make the decisions for you. So again, please pay attention to all these things as you're going through the house. That way, again, you get a better idea of the things that you actually really need versus the things that you just want, right? Now, as you're out there, you're going to see all sorts of properties. This is going to include bank owned and short sale properties. Now, foreclosure properties, some people think, that means stay away from that, run away. I'm not going to be able to buy a foreclosed property. It's going to need too much work. Now, a lot of times, yes, foreclosed properties do need some repairs, but that is not always the case. And foreclosures we've seen over the years really change. Whereas it used to be, they would just always sell them as is. Whereas now I do see a lot of lenders doing some repair work. A lot of times they'll do repair work before they even put it on the market. So when it comes on the MLS, it is not necessarily a house that needs a rehab loan or needs a bunch of work. They may also be willing to do some repairs, once you've gone under contract and something comes up during an inspection. Right now, just like any seller in today's market, they're a little bit less likely to do it if they've got tons of activity. There's a lot of offers, tons of competition. Then there's less chance that they need to really do anything. But you may still have that opportunity with some of these bank-owned properties, especially if it's been sitting there for a little while. Some buyers get a little bit concerned just because they know it's a bank-owned property. They don't even bother going to take a look at it. And if you're brave enough to get out there and take a peek, then perhaps you'll be the one that benefits from doing it. Now, besides those foreclosure properties, and even if they do some repairs, typically it's going to be an as-is sale. Once whatever's been agreed to is done. You also may be limited in terms of your timeline. There are sometimes lenders that will put in per diems if you don't close, on time or by particular time. And I can always do another class talking about just foreclosures actually, because there's so much that goes into it. But it's really the what you need to understand is that it doesn't necessarily mean to run away and that you shouldn't consider it. All right. And again, just because there's so much competition and there's not many houses to choose from, you might as well try to, open up your net or widen your net as much as possible and look at anything that could possibly be a possibility. All right, so besides those foreclosures, you also may see what's called a short sale. Now, this is something that's not as common as it used to be. Some years ago, after the Great Recession and we had the market crash, we had a lot of short sale properties. They don't come up as often as they used to these days. Now, the important thing for short sales to understand is that a short sale is not short. It's actually typically takes a long time. Short sale refers to a shortage in funds. So there's not enough money to pay off the mortgage that's owed on the house. And because the market's gone up, in the past few years, we find that most people aren't in a situation where they're underwater on their property and they have some equity. So they don't, fall into a short sale situation. But if you do see something that's a short sale, there's a couple things you need to understand. One, the seller doesn't have enough funds to pay off that mortgage. So if they're already short on funds to pay the mortgage off in full, when they sell, they may not have funds to do repairs on the house. Depending on the attorney or the short sale negotiation company that they're utilizing, there may be additional fees that the buyer will incur as part of the short sale process. I've seen, upwards of $5,000 that a buyer has to pay on top of everything else that they've paid towards to a short sale negotiation company. Now, not all short sales, have payments like that. It really does depend on how the short sale is actually getting negotiated, who's handling it. And there are a lot of attorneys out there that don't charge those type of fees in order to negotiate short sales. But it's something that we see. So you want to make sure that you're aware of the potential, right? And if you don't want to deal with that and you see that there's a fee, right off the bat, maybe you don't even want to bother seeing the property. So again, the short sales, they're not short. They're typically long time, usually about 3 to 4 months before we get a response on an offer for a short sale. Longest short sale I had took 2 years. So short sales are not short. All right. Okay. All right. So let's say you've gone out there, you've seen a bunch of houses, you saw some short sales, you saw some bank-owned property, you saw everything. You finally find something you really like. At that point, you're going to go ahead and you're going to make an offer. So in Massachusetts, we're like a two-step state. It's a two steps to get under contract. Essentially, we do the offer form, and then we go into purchase and sales contract. And depending on where in Massachusetts, you may have an inspection in between. So you might do, offer, inspection, then purchase and sales. Whereas, some areas, especially in like the greater Springfield area, you're typically doing offer, purchase and sales, and then inspections. And that's really just more of just like a cultural thing, I guess you can say, depending on where it is that you're actually buying, and how the attorneys want to handle it. But when you go in ahead to actually make the offer, there's a couple things that are going to be very important, and your agent's going to be guiding you through all of this, right? The agent's going to be doing a few things. Actually, they should be kind of considering the overall situation, right? What is the days on the market for the property, right? What is their estimation of value? Right? Have they done a CMA? Do they think the house is overpriced? Do they think it's priced right? Also, they can go ahead and contact the listing agent on the property, try to find out as much as possible, what kind of activity they had on the house. Did they have a ton of showings? How many offers do they have? Are they expecting a number of offers to come in? There could be a whole number of factors that come into play, that will then help you determine how it is that you're going to create your strategy for your offer. But a couple of things that you're going to need to think about as you're doing this. Your dates are going to be very important. You want to make sure you have a realistic timeline for your inspection contingency. You want to make sure you have a realistic timeline for your financing. You want to make sure you have a realistic timeline for your closing, right? Because you don't want to be in a position where you're begging the seller to give you an extension, and maybe they don't want to give you an extension, and it's really not a good position to be in. And you want to be realistic with everybody, right? You want to make sure that everybody has a common understanding of a certain goal that we're going for, and as long as we're all working towards that, then we should be good. And you want to be realistic with that. You don't want to overpromise, but you also don't want to make your offer look unattractive, right? So, very important to talk to your agent. You'll be having conversations with your lender, and maybe even your attorney sometimes, to make sure that you're setting this up and wording things properly. So again, your dates are going to be very important. You actually have a couple of contingencies that are going to be in the offer, the standard form. And this gives you a couple of options to be able to walk away from the transaction and be able to get your deposit back. Now, essentially, you've got your inspection contingency, right? So if you're not satisfied with the inspections, you can walk away and get your deposit back. You've also got your mortgage contingency. So as long as you've applied for your mortgage and you've done everything you need to do that your bank asks you to do in order to get the loan, and you get denied or you just can't get it approved on time, you can get your deposit back. You can cancel. Now, in both situations, you can also ask for an extension if you just need more time. But you are given a couple of opportunities in order to cancel the transaction. And so it's, again, important to understand, what your obligations are and what your deadlines are in that you have to meet in order to make sure that your deposit's actually protected. Now, when you're writing up this offer, your agent's going to talk about a few things. We'll be talking about inspection dates. We'll also be talking about your timeline, in terms of your financing timeline to close. We'll also be looking at your, obviously your offer amount. Your deposit amount is also important. Many times a seller's looking for at least some sort of deposit with the initial offer. A lot of times I see like $100, could be $1,000, everything's negotiable. So there may be some sort of deposit amount with the offer, and then there's going to be a larger deposit usually when you sign the purchase and sales contract. That amount, total amount, varies again depending on where you're buying. Your agent may need to guide you on this. In the greater Springfield area, Western Massachusetts, I've seen as little as $500, as a deposit. With signing a purchase and sales contract. It's pretty rare, but I've seen it. A lot of times I see nowadays anywhere from 1 to 5%. Everything's negotiable, so that really all depends on, the seller, the number of buyers, how strong the offers are. And again, you'll talk to your agent about that. Something else you want to put in there, whether or not you're asking for, any of the appliances to remain. If we're going to ask for any repairs to be done up front, we want you to make sure that that's put in the offer. For a multifamily house, very, very important that we're asking for tenant related information, history of payments. Is there, any concerns, or is there any history of payments being missed at the property? We want to make sure that you've got verification that the tenants have been paying. So there are things you can add in the offer, like a contingency, upon your satisfactory review of certain documents. Closing costs. If you're going to include closing costs in the deal, that needs to be put in the actual offer. If it isn't written on the offer, it doesn't matter. The seller doesn't have to pay it to you unless it's in the contract. So just because your pre-approval says the seller is going to give you, the seller needs to give you an amount back. Again, you didn't get that amount back unless it's in the actual offer. Again, appliances need to be in there. If there's any contingencies for programs that you're getting, home buyer grants, if you have a contingency to sell a house, or a contingent upon you receiving some sort of funds from somewhere, there could be a whole number of things that you could be adding to the transaction to protect yourself in the event that certain things don't happen. But in the key things, again, dates, contingencies. Your agent's going to be able to guide you through all of this to make sure that you're setting it up properly. And your agent should also be having a conversation with the listing agent to find out what you can do to your offer to try to increase its chances of getting accepted. A lot of times sellers are really focused on the price that you're offering, but that's not always the case. And there are some situations where they may accept a lower offer because of other terms, whether or not the buyer's flexible on closing date, or maybe they have a larger deposit, or whatever the case may be. Like I said, there could be some opportunities to make your offer stronger other than the actual price. Now, once you've actually gotten the offer written, and your agent goes ahead and submits the offer, if it gets accepted, you want to go ahead and get that offer signed, right? We want to make sure that we've got a signed offer, because in Massachusetts, it ain't binding unless it's in writing. So we want to make sure that we're getting signed offers back. And that everything that's been agreed to is actually clearly written in that offer, so that there's no misunderstandings. Now, once the offer is actually signed or agreed to, typically in Western Massachusetts, we go right into a purchase and sales contract. So again, this step might come after an inspection. But if you're buying a property in our area, like I said, we usually go right into a purchase and sales contract. Now, the attorney who's going to do the closing, again, depending on where you're buying, you may need one or two attorneys. In Western Massachusetts, typically we've got one attorney that's going to handle the closing for the lender and then also review contracts on your behalf. In other parts of the state, you've actually got two attorneys, where one does the closing and then you have a separate attorney that's going to review those contracts and then do addendums and other things on your behalf. But your agent should be able to guide you through this part, depending on, again, where you're actually making your purchase. But at this point, there's, again, a contract is going to be drafted. Purchase and sales contract will be reviewed. Once that's approved and the attorneys have made all their changes, you're actually going to sign that and give the remainder of your deposit. All right. Now, the deposit is different from the down payment. Now, the deposit is the amount that you negotiate with the seller to secure the deal. Now, that deposit does get applied towards your down payment. So let's say, for example, you were buying a $100,000 house and you had to put 5% deposit. I'm sorry, 5% down payment. That'd be $5,000. And then let's say the seller wanted a $5,000 deposit on the house. You give the seller $5,000 on the deposit. In the eyes of the bank, you've also satisfied that down payment for them, right? So again, your agent will be able to explain that to you, but you're going to go ahead and you're going to give your deposit once you sign the purchase and sales contract. Now, once this is signed, any changes or additions need to be made in writing, right? Any extensions, amendments, anything in real estate really needs to be in writing, is the bottom line, right? So you want to make sure that your agent's putting things in writing. Everyone has a clear understanding of what their obligations are. Everyone has a clear understanding of what's expected, right? And that we want to make sure that everyone's on the same page, really. Now you've signed those you signed the purchase and sales contract. Once that's signed, we then typically move right into that home inspection. Now, usually we've got a 10-day window. That's usually the recommended window for inspections, but that's negotiable. So again, it may not be a full 10 days, but usually you've got about 10 days. Now, during this period, you're gonna have the opportunity to spend your money on a few things. Actually, you can do a structural mechanical inspection. You can do a termite inspection. You can do mold inspection, radon inspection. There's water tests that you could have done on the property. You can do a lead inspection at this time. So there's all sorts of things that you could spend your money on. It's very important so that you learn as much as possible about the property. There are some people who look at this as, I don't want to have this extra expense. I don't want to pay for an inspection. But the way I see it is that it's kind of like an insurance policy. You're much better off, spending and losing, a couple $100 on an inspection and not buying the house, as opposed to not doing an inspection and then buying a house and realizing you've got thousands and thousands of dollars worth of repairs that you really don't want to have to deal with. So again, it's really important that you're taking the time to understand what you're about to get into, and you really should have a home inspection. The inspector really needs to be licensed. Just because you know a contractor doesn't mean that they're a home inspector, right? We want somebody who understands home inspections. You also need to be present at the home inspection. Not only are you going to learn about the things that are wrong at the house, but you're also going to learn about the things that are right. How to operate things, how to shut off the water in an emergency. How does the heating system work? These are things that are going to be important, just through the course of home ownership. So you want to make sure you understand that stuff. So be present at the inspection. And then once we're gone through the property, you then get to make the decision. It's not up to the bank. It's not up to the seller. It's not up to anybody else other than you, the buyer, to decide whether or not you are satisfied with the results of the home inspection. Now, you really got a couple of options. One, let's say you are satisfied with everything. You can move forward as is, so that's great. Two, let's say it's absolutely crazy and you need to run away. Okay, we can cancel the deal. We can get your deposit back. All right, and then there's also the in-betweens. What if there's some repair work there, you're concerned about it, you're not so sure if you're going to move forward? Well, that's our opportunity to negotiate. And then we've got a couple of options there. You can either request for the seller to renegotiate the price. You can request the seller to do some repairs, so you can negotiate some repairs. Or perhaps you can negotiate a credit. Now, depending on the loan that you're dealing with and whether or not you've already are receiving some credits, you may or may not be able to add a credit to it. So you could possibly be in a situation where you're only left with the option to do a price reduction or to do a repair by the seller. But a lot of times there's an opportunity to do a credit or figure it out some way so that you actually, can show up with less to the closing or something like that. And that way you've got cash in hand to deal with the repair after closing. Now, once you're completed with your inspections, let's say you come to an agreement to move forward. Anytime you do come to an agreement, if there's larger repairs, you really want to make sure that you're asking for those repairs to be done by a licensed person. And sometimes a certain work is going to need permits, so you may want to ask for that as well. But again, you want to make sure that it's a licensed person, at least that's completing the repairs. All right, now, again, let's say we're good with the inspection. We've decided to move forward. Everything is just peachy, right? Now, once we've done that, with the inspections, we're going to move on to our bank commitment. And right after the inspections, we're going to do an appraisal. Now, depending on the way you've set up your transaction, you may not have the liberty of waiting to do the appraisal until after the inspection. If you've set yourself up with a short timeline to close, you may need to order the appraisal immediately. But we like to set up our transactions in a way so that buyers are paying for an appraisal after they've made the decision to actually buy the house based on the inspection, right? You've had the opportunity to do the inspection, to go through it, to make sure you're satisfied with the overall condition. before you're spending money to find out what the value is. Um, Now, again, you may not always be in the position to do this, but if you set it up correctly, you should be able to do it this way. And the lender's going to go ahead and send the appraiser out there, and they're going to go through the property. Now, if you're dealing with things like an FHA loan, or your contract has repairs listed in it, then you want to make sure some of those items are taken care of before the appraiser goes. There are instances where the appraiser, depending on the type of loan, is going to go and they're going to require repairs to be done. And if you can alleviate those issues before the appraiser goes, then it's one less thing to actually have to deal with. So, if you've negotiated with the seller to do certain things that you or your agent think is going to be an issue for financing, hopefully you can negotiate for them to have that stuff done quickly before the appraiser even goes. Another part of it is that if, let's say, the appraiser goes and calls some items that need to be repaired, there is typically a charge for the buyer for the appraiser to go back to verify that the repairs are actually completed. So it saves you a little bit of money in order to get those repairs done, sooner than later. Now, as part of that, while that appraisal is happening, you're going to be submitting tons of stuff to the lender. There's going to be a lot of paperwork, a lot of digging they're going to be doing, and you really need to make sure that you're quick about getting everything to them. Do not take your time, getting documents that they ask for you. Everything is really time sensitive, so you want to make sure that you're quick and that you're submitting the stuff that they need, because we don't want to be in a situation where we're asking for more time or we can't close on time because you took a couple of extra days to send in a document. Now, the lender's actually going to go through this whole process of reviewing everything. There is going to be a bit of a waiting period. Once you actually submit documents, sometimes it's a week or two before the lender really has anything for us. They may be processing some things. They may be waiting for the appraisal report. They may be waiting on certain things to happen, and they just don't need anything from you. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be ready. You should continue to collect your pay stubs. Should continue to have your bank statements available to you, and you should make sure you don't do anything with your credit. It is very important that you're not taking out new lines of credit, that you're not taking on new debt. Do not go get a Home Depot credit card because you're about to buy a house and you want to make repairs, right? You do not want to do anything with your credit. Until you actually close on the house, the bank will continue to check your credit situation. And so again, very important that you don't do anything to mess with it. Now, after the bank actually approves everything, they're going to give us a commitment, and we really want to see what's called a condition. We really want to see a commitment with no conditionals. They may tell you they've got a conditional commitment, and a conditional commitment really means there's still things that need to be approved. So that's not really a full commitment. It's not really a full approval, because there could be a couple reasons why you get denied at the last second if there are conditions still remaining. So we want to see something from the bank that shows that everything is pretty much all set, right? That they've approved everything, everything's been cleared, and we're ready to actually close, okay? Now, there are times where we get to our mortgage contingency date and you don't have a full commitment. You may have contingencies left over. At that point, we may need to assess the situation to determine whether or not we should be extending our mortgage date or need to adjust anywhere else, or whether or not if we've only got something like, let's say, waiting on the title, right, but all the other conditions are cleared, then we're good to go at that point, because the seller's got to provide the title. Now, also, during this time, you're going to work on getting your homeowner's insurance. I always recommend to my buyers that they also shop around for car insurance at the same time, right? A lot of places will give you a discount by putting car insurance and home insurance together in a package. You might get a 10% discount or whatever type of discount, right? So shop around for car insurance, shop around for homeowner insurance, shop around for both at multiple places, right? You may find that you're in a position to best fit you if you stay where you're at, right, and to bring your home in there, or you may find you're in a position to be better off where you move both your home somewhere else and you bring your auto insurance somewhere else. If you can save a few $100s for the year or save some money for the month, that's really money in your pocket, and it's kind of like saving on your mortgage, right? So try to shop around as much as you can for the insurance. Now, once the lenders, got everything actually approved, and has given us, our commitments with no conditions, we can go ahead and actually get ready to close. Now, typically, we try to go back before, as early as we can before the closing to verify that any agreed repairs are taken care of. So we want to make sure we've gotten paperwork for repairs, anything that can be provided that the seller is able to provide, that we've got all that stuff, and that you're satisfied with the repairs. We don't want to show up on the day of closing to then realize, oh, something wasn't quite done right, or there was a misunderstanding, and then you're not happy. So you really want to make sure that that's settled ahead of time, as far ahead of the closing as possible. A lot of times we typically find ourselves doing it like a week and a half, sometimes 2 weeks ahead of time. And then, you're also going to do another walkthrough the day of, or the night before the closing, just to make sure that everything's still the same, right before you go to close. Now, once you've gotten your approval, the lender's given us a clear to close, and we've done our check on repairs, so we're good there. We've also gone ahead and scheduled a walkthrough. Everything should pretty much be ready to go at that point. We want to make sure you've got your funds to close. So whatever you need to bring for funds, that you've got that ready. You also want to make sure you've got multiple forms of ID. Most lenders will require one, but every once in a while I see a lender that requires two forms of ID. So you want to make sure that you've got a second form of ID, just in case you end up in the scenario where you end up with one of those lenders. You also want to review with your attorney ahead of time how much you actually need to bring to the closing, because that's going to change depending on even the day that we close. There might be slight adjustments. So you want to make sure you know exactly what you're bringing to a closing. Usually the closing actually happens at the attorney's office. It's actually very rare in our area for the buyer and the seller to even meet. And I've only had 2 times, since 2002 that I can think of, where a buyer and the seller were even in the same office at the same time as closing. So it's usually just going to be you and the attorney. In the past, it used to be you, the attorney, and the agent. But lately, they're just reducing, obviously for known reasons, the number of people showing up to the closings. So now it might just be you and the attorney. And then the buyer agent or your agent should be then connecting with you after that to do some sort of transfer of keys. Another thing you actually need to keep in mind for the day of closing, and you may want to do this the day before, but certainly by the morning of closing, you need to contact the utility companies for the new house, so that you can go ahead and transfer the services at that house into your name. The reason that this is important is that the current owners may call to shut off the services. And especially if we're in the middle of the winter and on, like, let's say a Friday, and all those utilities get shut off, and then you show up there Friday night with no power and no heat, you're probably not getting the heat on for a couple days. So, if you call at least that morning of, or a day or two before the closing, you should be able to avoid a situation where they're turning off the utilities, and they should be able to transfer them into your name. Now, when I say transfer utilities, that doesn't mean you're shutting off the utilities in the place that you're currently living, right? You're really going to have like 2 accounts. You're going to have the account at the new place plus the place that you're currently living. And then once you've moved everything into the new place, then you can shut down, the old utility. Once that's all done, and you've signed everything with the attorney, I mean, that's really pretty much it. In Massachusetts, we do like to wait until the attorneys have met, the documents have been exchanged, and they've recorded everything at the registry of deeds. And at that point, that's when you typically are going to be able to get access to your keys, and then you can go ahead and do whatever it is that you want at your new home. Well, that's basically it. I mean, in a nutshell, that is the basic framework in terms of what you'll see if purchasing a property in Massachusetts. Now, again, things will vary depending on even the city or town that you're buying in. So it's obviously very important that you're speaking with a licensed agent in your area that can actually guide you through the process and increase your chances of success. As always, if you guys have any additional questions about the real estate process, I'm actually more than happy to do a one-on-one buyer consultation with you if you're purchasing in Massachusetts. So feel free to reach out to me anytime. You can schedule a call on my website at HeSellsHouses.com, or you can text me 413-626-4097, and I look forward to helping you out with all of your real estate needs.